The morning Isolde married Mr. Harlan Voss. The sky was the color of old pewter, and her father held her hand too long at the church door before letting go. She was 23, he was 38. The arrangement had been settled between her father and his solicitor over 2 letters and 1 brief meeting in a Hartford drawing room in the autumn of 1889. No one had asked her opinion of it, and she had not offered one. That was, she understood, the shape of things. Harlan Voss was not unkind. She would remind herself of this, later, in the years that followed. He was not unkind, he simply did not see her. There is a particular quality to being invisible to the person who shares your table, your house, your name. It is not like being overlooked in a crowd, where anonymity has a kind of freedom to it. It is like being a piece of furniture in a room the owner has stopped noticing. Still useful, still there, no longer seen. He introduced her, in those first months, as my wife with a half-turn of the wrist, as if presenting a document he had already signed and filed. His colleagues from the bank would nod. Their wives would smile at Isolde, and she would smile back, and the conversation would move on to things that did not include her. She learned to be quiet the way some people learn a second language, fluently, without accent. The house on Ashford Lane was large, built for a family that had not yet materialized, and cold in the winter in the particular way that large houses are cold, not from lack of firewood, but from the presence of too much empty space. Isolde had come with 3 trunks, a watercolor set she had not opened since her wedding day, and a small habit of noticing things that no one else thought worth noticing. She noticed, for instance, that the kitchen garden behind the house had been left to go entirely to seed. She noticed that 2 of the tenant cottages on the east side of the property had roof damage that had gone unaddressed through the previous autumn. She noticed that the household accounts, kept by a Mr. Gantry at Harlan's direction, were organized in a way that made errors invisible until they compounded. She did not mention any of this. She did not think she was meant to. She wrote letters to her mother instead. Long ones, careful ones, which described the house and the neighbors and the weather, and nothing true at all. It was at the Whitmore dinner, 7 months into the marriage, that she first understood how Harlan spoke of her when she was not in the room. She had stepped away from the table to find Mrs. Whitmore's maid, who had promised to bring up Isolde's shawl from the cloakroom. The hallway outside the dining room was quiet. The door had swung most of the way closed behind her, but not entirely, and voices carry, in old houses, in ways their owners forget. "Voss, your wife is remarkably silent." That was Alderton, the one with the red cravat. She had met him twice, and he had not retained her name either time. "She is." Harlan's voice, measured and dry. "It's one of her better qualities, laughter." Several men, all at once. "Suits you then," Alderton said. "You never did want anything complicated." "No," Harlan agreed. "A quiet wife and a reliable ledger. That's the whole of it." More laughter. Isolde stood in the hallway for a moment, her hand not quite touching the wall beside her. Then she found the maid, retrieved her shawl, returned to the table, and finished the evening with the same composure she had arrived with. She did not cry until she was home. She did not make a sound even then. The thing about being invisible is that it has a cost no one tallies. It does not announce itself. It accumulates, the way sediment accumulates at the bottom of a river, slowly, imperceptibly, until one day the water cannot move the way it once did. Isolde began to move differently that winter. She started with the kitchen garden, because it was the most immediate problem, and because no one would notice what she did there. She hired a young man named Tipton from the village to help her turn the beds, ordered seeds from a catalog in Boston, and by March had planted enough for the household and the 2 tenant families besides. She did not mention it to Harlan. He did not ask. She turned her attention next to the accounts. She had kept her father's books for 2 years before her marriage. He had trusted her with them in the way he trusted her with most practical things, quietly and without ceremony, and she could see, within an afternoon of looking at Mr. Gantry's work, where the losses were hiding. She made a ledger of her own. She kept it in the drawer of her writing desk. In the spring, she approached the tenant on the east cottage, a man named Prentice, widower, 3 children, and arranged with a local carpenter for the roof to be mended, paying from the household account in a line item she recorded as property maintenance. When Harlan signed the quarterly review without reading it, she did not feel surprised. She had by then stopped expecting him to read it. She was not doing any of it to prove something. She was doing it because the problems were there, and she could see them. And she did not know how to look at a problem without also looking for its solution. That was simply how she was built. The neighbors began to notice things before Harlan did. Mrs. Prentice, the elder one, from the village, no relation to the tenant, stopped Isolde on the road one afternoon to say that the East Field looked better than it had in 10 years. The carpenter, a man called Bauer, left his card a second time and asked if Mrs. Voss might have other work she needed doing. The woman who ran the lending library in town, a sharp-eyed widow named Mrs. Crale, began to save books for Isolde without being asked. Isolde did not think of these things as a community. She did not think of them as anything in particular. She simply knew their names, and they knew hers. 2 years into the marriage, Harlan told his mother that Isolde was pleasant enough but not much use in society. She overheard this, too, not by design, but because she had developed the habit, without meaning to, of being in rooms where people forgot she was present. His mother, a stately woman named Mrs. Dorothea Voss, who wore her silver hair like a crown she had earned, had made a sound somewhere between agreement and equivocation and changed the subject to the Hartley ball. Isolde had stood in the doorway of the morning room for 3 seconds before walking back down the hall. That evening, she opened the watercolor set for the first time since her wedding. She painted badly, at first. Her wrists had forgotten the looseness required. The proportions were wrong, and the colors bled in ways she hadn't intended. But she painted the view from the upstairs window, the kitchen garden, now full and orderly, and the fields beyond it, and the low line of trees at the property's edge. And when it was finished, she looked at it for a long time. She did not show it to anyone. Harlan had a friend called Mercer, Alistair Mercer, from the bank, a man with an easy laugh and very little underneath it, who came to dinner 4 or 5 times a year and treated the house as a comfortable stop between more interesting destinations. He was, Isolde had concluded, the sort of man who charmed people by making them feel chosen, without ever actually choosing anyone. She did not dislike him. She simply did not believe a word he said. It was Mercer, who at dinner in the autumn of the second year, had said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who considered himself welcome everywhere, "Voss, I don't know how you manage it. Wife so quiet you forget she's there. House runs itself somehow. What's your secret?" Harlan had smiled the particular smile he used for compliments he considered deserved. "Good management," he said. "Is it?" Mercer looked at Isolde then, briefly, the way you look at a piece of art in a gallery you are passing through. "Mrs. Voss, do you have much to do with the running of the place?" "A little," she said. "She has the garden," Harlan said, with the air of a man being generous. "And she keeps herself occupied." Mercer nodded, and turned the conversation back to something at the bank. And Isolde watched her husband accept credit for the work she had been doing for 2 years, and she thought, not angrily, not yet, but with a kind of crystalline clarity, that she had become a very well-kept secret. It was the clarity that changed things, not the anger. The anger came later, and even then it was quiet, a thing that burned low and even rather than hot and sudden. The clarity came first, and it was this. She had spent 2 years making a life in a house that did not see her, with a man who would tell his friends she was pleasant enough. And she had done it so well that even her competence had become invisible. She did not decide to leave. Not then. Not all at once. It was more that she stopped arranging herself around the shape of someone else's indifference. She wrote a letter to her cousin Nettie in Philadelphia, who had married a professor and lived a small, bookish, cheerful life in a row house near the university. She asked if there might be room for a visit. Nettie wrote back within the week. There was always room. There was a spare room that looked out onto the garden. Come whenever you like. Come for as long as you need. Isolde packed 2 trunks. The watercolor set. Her father's copy of Middlemarch, which she had been carrying around for 3 years without opening. And the ledger, which she left on Harlan's desk with a note that said only, "Property accounts, 1890 to 1892. Recommended review." She told Mrs. Alderton next door that she was going to visit family. She told Bauer the carpenter that there was a project on the north fence she would correspond with him about from Philadelphia. She told the woman at the lending library, Mrs. Crale, that she would have an address forwarded. She did not tell Harlan she was leaving in any permanent sense. She left him a note that said she was going to stay with her cousin for a time, and that she hoped he was well, and that the larder was stocked through March. He did not write for 11 days. When he did, the letter was 4 lines and asked if she had seen a particular document he required for the quarterly review. She wrote back with its location, 3rd drawer of the study desk, beneath the survey maps, and did not mention when she might return. She had been in Philadelphia for 3 weeks when she unfolded her father's copy of Middlemarch and found, tucked inside the front cover, a letter in her father's handwriting. Not new. The paper was soft at the folds, the ink slightly brown with age, but addressed to her. She sat down in Nettie's garden, on a wooden chair in the October sun, and read it. Her father had written it before the wedding. She had not known. He had tucked it into the book, she supposed, expecting her to find it sooner. He had always given her books the way other fathers gave daughters jewelry, as the most valuable thing he had. She had packed the book without opening it, and carried it for 3 years. The letter was not sentimental, because her father had not been a sentimental man. It was practical, in the way he was practical. He said that he hoped the marriage would be a good one, and that he suspected she would make it better than she found it, because that was what she did, and that if she ever found herself in a situation that was simply not worth improving, she should know that there was a sum set aside. Not large, but sufficient, in a separate account at a bank in Philadelphia, under her own name, which he had arranged through his solicitor the summer before her wedding. He had never told her. He had simply made sure she had options. She read the letter twice. Then she sat with it in her lap, and looked at the garden, which was not her garden, and thought about what it meant to have been seen. Quietly, practically, without ceremony, by someone who was no longer there to see her. She cried. She had not cried like that since the hallway at the Whitmore house, and even then it had been different, smaller, contained. This was the kind of grief that had been waiting behind a closed door for a long time, and she let it come. Then she dried her face, and went inside and wrote a letter to her father's solicitor. Harlan Voss did not notice that his wife was gone, in the way one notices the absence of something one has been paying attention to. He noticed it the way one notices that a clock has stopped only because the house has become somehow wrong without the sound of it. The first indication was the household accounts. He received a bill from a feed supplier in March and could not locate the relevant receipts. He sent a letter to Mr. Gantry, who informed him that Mrs. Voss had been handling that correspondence since the previous spring. He went looking for the records and found them, meticulously organized, in a system he did not immediately understand. He managed. He hired a man from the bank to oversee the accounts. The man cost 4 times what the arrangement with Isolde had cost, which was to say 4 times nothing. The second indication was the kitchen garden. By June, without her direction, it had gone back to seed in the patches she had been tending. The tenant Prentice came to the house in May to ask about the repairs to the north fence that Mrs. Voss had mentioned, and Harlan, who had not known there was a north fence in need of repair, said he would look into it. He did not look into it. The third indication was the Alderton dinner in June, where Mrs. Alderton asked after Isolde with a warmth and specificity that surprised him, asking about the Philadelphia visit, about the watercolor work, about whether Mrs. Voss would be back for the harvest fair, which she had apparently been involved in organizing the previous autumn. Harlan had not known she was involved in organizing it. He had attended it, and thought someone else must have arranged the flower arrangement at the entrance, which had been unusually fine. "You must miss her terribly," Mrs. Alderton said, and Harlan heard, beneath the pleasantry, a question with an edge to it. "Of course," he said. He wrote to Isolde that evening, a longer letter than usual. He asked about Philadelphia, about her cousin, about her health. He mentioned at the end that the house seemed very quiet. She wrote back. She was well. Nettie was well. She had been visiting the Philadelphia Museum and had taken up her watercolors again more seriously. She hoped the accounts were in order. She did not mention when she was coming back. He wrote again. She answered. This continued through the summer, letters that were, on her end, pleasant and informative and entirely impenetrable. He could not find a foothold in them. He had not realized, before, that she had always been the one managing the texture of their correspondence, their conversation, their dinner table, every surface of the domestic life he had been moving through, without noticing what kept it smooth. In August, Mercer came to dinner and asked, over the considerably diminished meal that the new cook had produced, where Mrs. Voss was these days. "Visiting family," Harlan said. "Still? She's been gone what, 6 months? 5. Mercer looked at him with an expression that was, coming from Mercer, remarkably close to sympathy. "You all right, Voss?" "Perfectly. Because this," Mercer gestured, broadly, "at the dining room, at the house, at the general state of things, is not what I remember." Harlan did not answer. He refilled Mercer's glass and changed the subject. But he sat with the observation afterward, alone in the study, and he thought about what Mercer had meant, and what it indicated about what he himself had failed to observe. He went to the study window. The kitchen garden was visible from there in the summer, when the light lasted late. It was, in August, recognizable. She had left it in good enough order that it had taken months to begin to fail, but diminished. The rows he could see were not what they had been. He thought about the Whitmore dinner. He did not let himself think about it directly. He approached it sideways, the way you approach a wound you are not ready to examine. But he knew it was there. He had said those things. He had laughed with Alderton. He had meant them, in the careless way that one means things that have never been tested. He took the ledger she had left him and read it properly for the first time. It was, he understood, reading it, a record of 2 years of invisible labor. Every repair, every account, every arrangement that had kept the house and the property functioning, while he had been at the bank concluding transactions and telling his friends that his wife was quiet and not much trouble. The numbers were exact. The margins were annotated in her small, clear hand. She had saved him money he hadn't known he was losing and generated income from the kitchen garden and the East tenant arrangement that he hadn't known existed. He closed the ledger and sat for a long time. He went to Philadelphia in September. He did not write ahead. He was not sure if he wrote ahead that she would be there when he arrived. He found the address through Nettie's husband, who he reached through the university, and he stood outside the row house on a Tuesday morning that was cool and overcast and knocked on the door. Nettie answered. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite hostile but was not far from it. Mr. Voss. He did not know Nettie's married name. He had not retained it. I'm sorry, I'd like to see Isolde, if she's willing. Nettie did not move from the doorway. Are you here to ask her to come back? I'm here, he said, to ask her what she wants. That was not something he had planned to say. He was not certain, even as he said it, that he meant it in the specific and self-reckoning way it required to mean. But it was what came out, and he let it stand. Nettie looked at him for another moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. Isolde was in the garden. She was painting. A small canvas on a folding easel, a view of the street over the garden wall. She was wearing a dark dress, and her hair was up loosely, and she had paint on her left hand, and she did not look up when he came through the door. Then she did. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him, with a composure that he understood now, in a way he had not before, was not indifference but protection. She had learned to look at him as though he could not reach her, because he had not in 3 years tried. Harlan, she said. Isolde. He sat down in the other chair. There were two, worn and mismatched, with a small table between them, because he did not want to stand over her. She set down her brush. She waited. I read the ledger, he said. I know you did. You mentioned it in your last letter. I read it properly. The whole of it. She was quiet. I've been thinking, he said, about what it means that I didn't read it when you left it. About what that says. It says you didn't expect it to be important. Yes. He looked at the garden, which was neat and small and very different from what she had made on Ashford Lane, and then back at her. I've been thinking about the Whitmore dinner. She went very still. I didn't know you heard, he said. I know you didn't. He could have said then that he hadn't meant it, or that it was the sort of thing men said, or that Alderton had been drinking and the whole thing was lesser than it sounded. He thought about saying those things. He chose not to. It was unkind, he said. It was more than unkind. It was a lie, though I didn't know enough to know it was a lie at the time. She looked at him steadily. What did you not know? I didn't know. He stopped. He tried again. I didn't know what you were doing. I didn't know what the house was. I told them you were quiet and not much trouble, and I was describing a piece of furniture because that's what I thought you were. And you weren't. He paused. I don't know what I thought a marriage was supposed to be. I know it wasn't what we had. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere over the wall, a cart went past on the street. Why are you here, Harlan? Her voice was not cold. It was something more careful than cold, measured, waiting. Because I would like to know if you will come back. And because I understand if the answer is no. He said this last part slowly, because it was the true part and the hard part, and he had had to practice saying it in the right order. I don't have the right to ask you to. I know that. Isolde looked at him for a long time. She had been in Philadelphia for 5 months. She had been to the museum 14 times. She had filled 2 sketchbooks and started a third. She had had more conversations that felt like conversations, real ones, about real things, than in 3 years on Ashford Lane. She had slept better than she had slept in years. She had also, she acknowledged, missed the garden. The specific, impractical, entirely hers garden. She had missed the north fence and the east cottage and old Prentice and his 3 children and Mrs. Crail at the lending library. She had missed knowing the shape of a property and a community, and seeing the places where things needed tending. She had not missed feeling invisible. If I came back, she said slowly, it would not be to the same arrangement. I know, I don't know yet what it would be. I would need time to think about that. All right, and I would need you to understand that I'm not certain I will. Come back. All right. he said again. She picked up her brush, she looked at the canvas. Then she looked back at him. You can stay for dinner if you'd like. Nettie won't mind. It was not a reconciliation. It was not a promise. It was an open door, which was more than he had arrived expecting, and less than he knew he deserved. He stayed for dinner. He listened more than he spoke. He watched Isolde at Nettie's table, the way she talked, the way she laughed, the ease of a woman in a room where she had been allowed to take up her full amount of space. And he recognized, with a precision that felt like consequence, everything he had failed to see for 3 years. He returned to Hartford the next morning. He wrote to her that evening, and this time the letter was different. Not a request, not an account, but something closer to the plain truth of what he was beginning to understand about himself, which was uncomfortable and not yet complete. She wrote back. They wrote for 6 weeks. The letters were longer than they had ever been when they lived in the same house. She returned to Ashford Lane in November, on a morning that smelled of frost and wood smoke. She came with her 2 trunks and her watercolor set, and 3 new sketchbooks and a cutting from a plant Nettie had given her for the garden. Harlan met her at the door. He did not make a speech. He was not by nature a man given to speeches. He had thought about whether to make one, and had decided against it. She had always been the one who could tell the difference between a said and a thing meant, and he had not yet earned the right to confuse the two. He took her bags. He showed her what he had attempted to do with the accounts while she was gone, so she could see where it had gone wrong, and not simply inherit the wreckage without context. It was the most honest conversation they had ever had in that house. That winter they began, slowly and imperfectly, and without a great deal of ceremony, to talk to each other. Not about the house or the accounts, or the tenant cottages, though they talked about those things too, but about other things, the things she was painting, the things he was reading, what they had each believed a marriage was supposed to be, and how those beliefs had come from nowhere in particular, and cost them 3 years. At the Alderton dinner in December, the same house, the same table, the same cut-glass decanters in the same light. Alderton asked Harlan how things were going, and Harlan said, with a quietness that sounded nothing like his old quietness, "Better than I deserved." Alderton laughed, assuming it was a kind of joke. Harlan did not clarify. Isolde, seated 2 chairs down, heard him. She reached for her water glass and did not look at him, but something in the set of her shoulders changed, just slightly, just enough, the kind of change that does not announce itself. On the drive home, the night was clear and cold and full of stars, and neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. And it was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say. It was the silence of 2 people who had learned, at some cost, how to be in the same room without disappearing. "You didn't have to say that," she said at last. "I know," he said. "I meant to." She looked out the window at the dark fields going past, and the low line of trees at the property's edge, and the lit windows of the house at the end of the drive coming into view. It was not a perfect house. It was not a perfect life. It was, she thought, something she had helped build, quietly, without credit, and then, slowly, with it. She did not need it to be more than that. The house was warm when they came inside.